Okay, so this is a presentation related to Chapter 2, which is on support, government support programs for children and families, specifically related to poverty. So I've entitled it Anti-Poverty Policies and Programs. And so why is poverty an important construct? Um, well, poverty leads to a number of risks, both physical, social, environmental, neighborhood level risks to children. Um, so, the goal of our anti poverty policies at the federal and state level is to break the cycle of poverty between children and parents. So, it's not necessarily to raise adults up in the financial strata, it's to direct our protective mechanisms um, for poverty prevention at children. So you'll see that a lot of our programs are related to having a child in the home. Um, and so really it's very difficult, for example, as a single male without children in the home to get any form of anti-poverty um, assistance. So like I said, poverty is a risk factor for current social health conditions and also for later academic, employment, and behavior issues. So the question we need to start with is, how is poverty defined? Um, you know, I think this is a bit of an academic, but also an important distinction between relative poverty and absolute poverty. And so, for example, um, the poverty that we tend to see in the United States looks a lot like this. The homes I go to look like this. That is, it's a trailer house that may or may not be well kept. There's not a lot of physical property. There may not be a washing machine or dryer. In this case, you see that they've hung their laundry out. But there is, at the same time, you can tell from this picture, um, television. There's several satellites. There's transportation. You see to the right, there's a vehicle. There's some degree of air conditioning or climate control. You see by the air conditioner in the um, the window there. But we would call this poverty. At the same time, in other nations, what's viewed as poverty is something like this, which is um, not meeting basic daily needs. Like these children don't have adequate clothing. The clothing that they have is insufficient. Sanitation is inadequate. It's unhealthy. And so this is this idea of absolute versus relative poverty. Our poverty in the United States tends to be relative. Even our most poor people here in the United States would not be considered poor in most or many other countries in the world. And so the poor here are poor in relation to the general population, but perhaps not in absolute terms. That is, that there may not be an absolute poverty, lack of food, lack of um, shelter, lack of clothing. There's actually not a whole lot, despite what you may hear in other classes, of childhood hunger, um, because there's programs available to children to get food. Children are served food at school such that they aren't starving. But we don't see the distended bellies, the evidence of malnutrition that you see in other places. So interestingly, how is poverty measured? We talk about this uh, concept all the time of the poverty level. So what's the poverty level? Well, it's based on Molly Orshansky's work in 1963. She worked for um, the Food and Drug. No, she worked for the um, Agriculture Department. So Molly Orshansky worked as like an intern in the uh, or a low-level employee in the Department of Agriculture, and they told her in 1963, "We need a measure of poverty. You're on it." And so the way she developed the uh, poverty level, the measure of poverty is this food basket model. It was prepared in response to LBJ's war on poverty. We need to be able to define poverty if we're going to fight it. And so what she did is she went to the grocery store and she determined that a family of three needed a certain amount in the grocery basket in order to feed them. So there was this survey out there that the average family spent a third of its budget on food. Molly Orshansky figured out how much an average family eats and then simply multiplied the cost of food times 3 to come up with the poverty level. It is just that scientific, and it's not been changed for the last 50 years, approaching 60 years now. And so we're still using that flawed, in my opinion, measure of poverty. It's just been adjusted for inflation. At the same time, the cost of food has changed, the benefits available to families has changed, and so we are really working with an outdated data. So in 1963, when Molly Orshansky, I'm sorry, it's a family of 4, not a family of 3. When Molly Orshansky created this level of poverty, it was $3,165, $3,165 in family income per year. In 2014, that number adjusted for inflation is $23,850. I'm sorry, I have not updated this number for 2015 numbers. But you can see that nothing's changed there between 1963 and 2014 other than the $3,165 has been adjusted for inflation of 2014 dollars. So income includes earnings, unemployment compensation, workers' compensation, veterans payments. However, it doesn't include non-cash government benefits. In 1963, there were very few non-cash government benefits. In fact, that's what the War on Poverty did in 1963, is it created a bunch of non-cash government benefit programs. So in 1963, the 3165 income was real income in real dollars, money from employment, money from sources that sort of contribute to the household income. However, this 2385 number in 2014 is real dollar money, that is from interest, employment, child support, alimony, workers' compensation, but that number doesn't include all of the value that a family gets through these approximately 126 programs like food stamps, housing, earned income tax credit, Medicaid. The Cato Institute has determined that the value of those non-cash benefits in 2012 was approximately $44,500. So, really, a family of 4 in 2014 could be making up to $23,849 and still be below the poverty level, and also be receiving approximately $45,000 in non-cash benefits. So the $23,850 is on top of benefits they're receiving for food through food stamps, housing through housing vouchers, earned income tax credit, which is a cash payment, medical care. In 1963, a family that had $3,165 had to pay out of that $3,165 food, housing, and medical care. That's not the case in 2014. So up until 1935, there was no role of the federal government in aid, cash aid to families. So why in 1935 did that change? Desperation. It was the Great Depression, and basically people were looking for any solution. And states, local, and private charities apparently weren't able to meet the need, and so families, citizens were willing to look to the federal government, which had not been involved before in aid to the poor, to sort of meet the needs that they were experiencing at the time. So here are the major anti-poverty programs that your book discusses many of these, not all of these. So AFDC is Aid to Families with Dependent Children. It's been renamed TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, in 1996 as part of the welfare reform under Clinton. That is one of the very few programs that provide cash payments. Everything else is usually some sort of a benefit that's not a cash payment. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but this requires that there be dependent children in the home. And after 1996 reforms, there's a work requirement and a 5-year lifetime limit. That wasn't the case before 1996 reforms. You could be on AFDC for as long as you had dependent children in the home and there wasn't a work requirement. So again, these are cash payments to families with children in the home, but requires that you be seeking work or working, and is temporary, meaning it's a 5-year lifetime limit. So next is SNAP, that's the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. We call that food stamps, is the sort of vernacular for that. It used to be stamps that you could use like money at a grocery store, but now it's these EBT debit cards. The Lone Star program is what you'll see at the grocery store when people are using their SNAP benefits. Approximately 11% of households are currently receiving food stamp benefits, and that's 11% of all households, not just households with children. So WIC, Women, Infants, and Children's Program, was created in response to some concerns that women, concerns about prenatal health, about infant mortality, and so it's a nutrition program for women who are pregnant and in their postpartum period. It used to be who are breastfeeding, but now it also covers food and formula for infants and not just for breastfeeding mothers. So the Earned Income Tax Credit, we're going to talk in detail about that, is a refundable tax credit. Approximately 16% of all returns qualify for this cash payment. So I'll get to that in a minute. It's basically a cash refund check that comes in response to filing an income tax return. So CCDBG, the child care something block grant program. Sorry, I didn't know that. The letters swim at some points, but I'm going to say the child care dependency block grant, let's just say. So what this is aid for providing child care. It's a voucher. Some of you that work in child care facilities and daycares may see this. There's child care vouchers. The state determines the eligibility. The monies from the federal government is paid to the states with certain strings attached for the states to use to pay for child care. In Texas, it requires that the parent who's receiving the child care credit or child care voucher be working at least 30 hours a week. SSI, there's SSI, and there's also SSD, Social Security disability, and Social Security income, I think. So these are payments based on disability. So for adults and for children who are disabled, they're cash payments basically in lieu of the ability to work. Section 8, housing vouchers. So these are vouchers that are given for people to actually purchase housing in the marketplace from to rent housing from in the marketplace from landlords. And so this isn't government housing. This is vouchers used to purchase private housing. The Hope For project is public housing units. So this is public housing designed to create mixed income housing. If you've seen, I can't think of where the Hope For projects are in town, but if you've seen government housing that looks pretty nice, then that's this system. And so the idea is It's government housing. If you don't meet a income threshold that's low enough, then you pay rent at the housing. If you do meet an income that's low enough, then the housing's free. And if you're sort of in between those, then there's a sliding scale for your rent based on your income. So the idea is not to create sort of havens of extreme poverty where everyone there is making it nothing. It's to create mixed income housing where there are working people, there are working poor, and there's also extreme poverty. So what have been the trends in poverty? Well, people will tell you, I will tell you, that the welfare reform of 1996 worked in reducing AFDC and now TANF benefits. There's been a 50% reduction in those cash benefits between 1997 and 2011. However, what that's done is basically moved people from those welfare rolls to other welfare rolls because we've seen a 171% increase in food stamp benefits. We've seen a 20% increase in WIC benefits. We've seen a almost 500% increase in earned income tax credit benefits and a 100% increase in Social Security disability. And so what, sort of the conventional wisdom out there and what you will read is that people are moving from AFDC benefits to Social Security benefits. So you may see a lot of push maybe on TV and maybe in other places to make a Social Security disability claim to be adjudicated disabled such that you receive Social Security benefits. The problem with that is AFDC benefits used to be time limited to having a dependent child in the home. So while a family or a person could receive those conceivably forever, they were directed toward dependent children. If you move that same person from the TANF rolls to the Social Security rolls, for example, after their 5 years of limited time is up, they can't receive TANF anymore, and they become certified disabled under the SSI system, then they're considered disabled for life, and it's either partial or full disability, and so they may actually not have to work and could still receive government benefits. So the problem there is we are creating welfare dependency for life through the SSI program because we're broadening the definition of disability, and we're getting more people on the disability rolls. Also, that doesn't require there be a child in the home, so it's changing the policy from directing poverty assistance to children to directing poverty assistance to adults. So, earned income tax credit. This is a very popular anti-poverty program. Almost at any level, Republicans, Democrats, everyone seems to like the earned income tax credit. It's a refundable tax credit of up to $6,000. That's if you have 3 children in 2013. So the authors of the bill say that it lifts 2.5 million children out of poverty each year. Sort of the devil's in the details on this one. How does the earned income tax credit work, and what are the problems with it? So the earned income tax credit, if you're single head of household with 3 children, this is an example. I don't have the handout for you, but I'll talk you through it. If you're single head of household with 3 children, you make $17,830 in income in 2013. So that means your weekly paycheck's $282.36. Okay, if that's your if you're a single mother making approximately $18,000 in income, you actually don't pay any income tax because you're below the federal poverty level, and so you may have taxes withheld from your paycheck, but you're going to get all of that amount back at the end. Or most people are smart enough to realize I'm not going to have to pay any income tax, so I'm not going to have any federal income tax withheld, and so I'm getting my entire paycheck. Then at the end of the year, you still file, even though you don't owe any taxes, you still file for an income tax. You still file an income tax return, and then income tax return, you report your income. You say I didn't have any taxes with held. You'll go through, and this is what the handout was. It was actually a W-2 form and a 1099. You'll actually go through the process of making a report. When you do, through the magic of this form, it will say that you, in fact, don't owe any income tax, and that'll be fine. Then you'll go on to say how many children do you have, what's your income level. At the end of that, it'll say you're actually entitled to a tax refund of $6,444. This amount is not any money that was ever withheld from your checks. Where this money comes from is out of the general fund, people who do pay income tax. And so this is $6,000 in basically welfare benefits to the tax filer, because this is never money that they earned, never money that was withheld from their checks. So here's the question. What is the problem with paying $6,044 in a tax refund check to all at once in January, February of the year? You will see around this period of time of the year, what do you see out there amongst the, on TV and as you drive down the road? You see a bunch of crazy people holding signs that say, file your income tax return here. You see a bunch of people that say, I own a car lot, spend your income tax return here. So we're giving $6,000 in new money to people in poverty and trusting that they're going to spend that money wisely and use it to lift themselves out of poverty. The question is, how does that money actually get spent? I think it's apparent from the ads on TV, from driving down the road, from looking at the car lots, that money is blown. Basically, it's received and spent on a car, or received and spent on electronics, or received and spent. It's not put in savings and then used in a monthly amount withdrawn, $500 withdrawn each month to use in addition to the money you're receiving from your employer. So why do you think states are pushing for residents to claim earned income tax? Why do the states and the cities like earned income tax credit benefits? Well, they like earned income tax credit benefits because it stimulates the economy. The problem is, if people in poverty received $6,000 and put it in a savings account, that's not going to stimulate anything. Cities and states depend upon people in poverty receiving their $6,044 tax refund and immediately spending it to stimulate the local economy. So states, municipalities want and believe that these people who receive this income tax refund will immediately spend it. And they do. So what this basically is a transfer of wealth, not from the federal government to poor people, but from the federal government to H&R Block, Best Buy, local car dealers. And so this is a real bad program in my opinion. But it's universally popular, and we'll see as we discuss, a lot of politicians are pushing for an increase in this program. So that's what's currently in effect. And we're going to talk about which of the candidates for president want to change or increase that. An alternate sort of thought on how to combat poverty is with a guaranteed annual income. So that is that everyone in the United States would receive a guaranteed minimum annual income to sustain themselves with. In 1966, Frances Fox Piven and I can't remember her husband's name, whose last name was Cloward, wrote an article that was published in The Nation called The Weight of the Poor. Uh, and the goal of the article was to move the United States to a guaranteed annual income. So Frances Fox Piven is still alive. Clower's dead. She's a political scientist and sociologist. She's a professor at the City University of New York Graduate Center. She's former president of the American Sociological Society or Association. And I'm going to include a link to The Weight of the Poor. The way that Frances Fox Piven believes we should move from where we are now, which is needs not being met amongst the poor, that the fact that there is still poverty, to this idea of a guaranteed annual income is through crisis. So her idea is if we crash the system with enough need, then what will happen is the federal government will turn from this piecemeal system of benefits to this annual income. So the steps, the steps for this strategy by Piven and Cloward towards a guaranteed annual income are to organize previously unorganized groups that are eligible for government benefits but not receiving all they can. So it's to go out and find people who are eligible and to get them signed up for benefits. To seek new beneficiaries and create new beneficiaries. So it's to request from the government different programs, more programs, to find people who will qualify for the new programs and to get them signed up. The aim of this system of sort of flooding the anti-welfare programs with new requests for money is to impose so much stresses on the system that it ultimately forces the collapse of the system. And the only option the government has at that point is to provide a guaranteed annual income. There are those that believe that this strategy is currently being utilized when you look at things like Obamacare, things like benefits that are being extended to undocumented workers. When you look at the vast increase in the amount of benefits, the number of programs, and also the sort of advertising or the marketing to people to make sure they're getting all of their benefits. I don't know if you've seen any ads, but if you go to some of the welfare offices, there are a lot of ads informing people to, make sure you're getting all your benefits. You need to make sure you're maximizing your benefits. And there are people that believe that that's part of this Piven and Cloward strategy towards an annual income. I provided that article. It certainly, and Frances Fox Piven has a lot of respect among some sectors of academia, but the article basically calls for a violent or less than violent overthrow of the current system through basically stress and replacement with something else. And so Frances Fox Piven was actually instrumental in the Occupy Wall Street movement and other movements that have sought to sort of mobilize the quote unquote 99% against the 1%. All right, so that's that short lecture. I hope you get this before class. We're going to be doing in class then is looking at, because it's an election year, the current policies proposed for poverty by the various presidential candidates. I'll see you in class.